I always knew my parents favored my sister over me, even though nobody ever said it directly, because growing up, it showed in every small detail the way she was comforted, first, praised first, and protected first, while I learned very early that staying quiet was safer than being noticed in our house. Whenever my sister cried, everyone rushed to her side, asking what was wrong and how they could help. But when I struggled, I learned to deal with it alone, because no one seemed to notice, and over time, I stopped expecting them to. At family dinners, my parents asked my sister about her day, her feelings and her plans for the future, while I sat there listening, feeling more like background noise than a part of the conversation. And when I tried to speak, the room would go quiet, like I was interrupting something important. If my sister was upset, the whole mood of the house changed and everyone adjusted around her. But if I was upset, I was told to calm down, be mature, or stop overreacting. And slowly, I learned that my emotions were something to manage quietly, not something to share. My sister brought home average grades, and they celebrated her effort, telling her how proud they were. But when I brought home good grades, they questioned why they were not better and what I could have done differently. Like success was expected from me, but never appreciated. When she made mistakes, they blamed stress, pressure, or bad luck. But when I made mistakes, they called it attitude or disrespect. And every argument somehow ended with me being told that I should know better, because I was supposed to be the strong one. Over time, I stopped asking for help, stopped talking about my problems, and stopped expecting fairness, because every time I hoped things would be different, it hurt more than staying silent. And I convinced myself that this was just how families worked. I learned how to be invisible, how to succeed quietly, and how to survive without reassurance, because in my family, love was not something you received equally. It was something you earned by not causing trouble. When college applications came, the favoritism stopped being quiet and finally became impossible to ignore, because my parents paid for everything for my sister without hesitation: tuition, housing, books, food, even spending money. While for me, they sat me down like it was a business meeting and calmly explained that they could not afford to support two kids at the same time. Nothing about their lives had changed. They lived in the same house, had the same jobs, and took the same vacations. But suddenly, money was a problem, only when it came to me. And that was the moment I realized fairness was never part of the plan. I worked 2 jobs while studying full-time, taking night shifts, weekends, and holidays. Watching my sister call home, crying about stress, while my parents rushed to comfort her and tell her everything would be okay, while I learned how to survive exhaustion quietly, because nobody ever asked if I was okay. There were nights I slept for 3 hours. Before classes, mornings I showed up half awake, and days I wondered how much easier everything would be if I had been treated the same. But every time I felt close to breaking, I reminded myself that asking for help only made things worse. I asked once, just once, if they could help with books or housing, and my dad looked at me and said, "You are strong, you will manage." And in that sentence I heard what they really meant, which was, "We trust you to suffer quietly, so we do not have to feel guilty." While my sister focused only on school and herself, I learned how to budget, survive, and push through burnout. And instead of feeling proud of myself, I felt angry, because independence was never a choice. It was forced on me. By the time college ended, I was not just tired, I was emotionally detached, because when you are treated like the backup child for long enough, you stop expecting support and start planning life as if you are completely on your own. After college, something finally changed, and for the first time it was not in their favor, because I got a good job, started earning real money, and slowly built a life that felt stable. And the moment that happened, my parents suddenly remembered I existed and started calling more often, asking how I was doing, and telling relatives how proud they were of me, like they had supported me all along. They shared my achievements online, talked about my success at family gatherings, and acted like they had believed in me from the beginning. even though they were never there during the nights I worked exhausted or the days I barely kept up, and it felt surreal watching them rewrite history so confidently. At the same time, my sister started struggling. She jumped between jobs, made bad decisions, and called home stressed and confused, and that is when the tone of every conversation began to shift, because her problems were no longer treated as her responsibility. They were quietly redirected toward me. My parents started asking if I could help her financially, saying it would only be temporary, reminding me that I was doing well, and repeating the same phrase, "Family helps family," even though that rule had never applied when I was the one drowning. Nobody asked if I was tired or overwhelmed or if I needed support. They just assumed I would handle it, because I always had. And the more successful I became, the more entitled everyone felt to my time, my money, and my stability. I noticed that every call ended with a request, every conversation carried an expectation, and every success I shared somehow turned into proof that I could give more. And that was when I realized I had not become their pride, I had become their solution. In their eyes, I was no longer the ignored child. I was the backup plan, the safety net, the one expected to fix what everyone else broke. And for the first time in my life, I understood that my value to them had never been emotional. It was always practical. Everything finally came to a head when my parents asked me to co-sign an apartment for my sister, and the way they said it made it sound like a favor I should be honored to do, as if my answer was already decided, and my role was just to agree and move on. I said no calmly, without raising my voice, and without giving a long explanation, because for the first time I did not feel like justifying myself, and the reaction was immediate. My mother started crying. My father raised his voice, and my sister accused me of abandoning her, like my refusal erased every sacrifice I had ever made. They said money had changed me, called me selfish, cold, and ungrateful, and that hurt more than I expected, because nothing about me had changed except the fact that I finally stopped saying yes and stopped pretending that everything was fair. That was the moment years of silence broke, because I told them how they paid for everything for my sister while I worked myself into exhaustion, how they never asked if I was okay, how being strong was never praise. It was permission to ignore me. I reminded them how every time I struggled I was told to manage on my own, while my sister was protected from consequences and carried through life. And the room went quiet, not because they understood, but because they did not want to hear what I was saying. My father said I was exaggerating, my mother said I was remembering things wrong, and my sister said I was punishing her for something that was not her fault. And I realized then that they were not listening. They were waiting for me to apologize and return to my place. For the first time, I did not apologize, I did not soften my words, and I did not try to make them comfortable, because I finally understood that any boundary I set would always look like betrayal to people who benefited from my silence. Standing there, I felt something strange, not guilt, not anger, but clarity, because I saw the pattern clearly, and I knew that no matter how calmly I explained myself, they would never accept a version of me that no longer existed to serve them. That conversation changed everything, even though nothing was said out loud afterward, because the calls became shorter, the tone became careful, and the warmth that was never really there disappeared completely. And for the first time, I was no longer confused about where I stood. My parents still checked in occasionally, but it felt distant, like they were afraid to ask for too much. And my sister stopped reaching out altogether, which hurt more than I expected, but also confirmed what I had already started to understand. No one apologized. No one acknowledged what I said, and no one tried to make things right, because that would have required them to admit that things were never fair. And instead they chose silence, because silence was easier than accountability. I spent a long time questioning myself, wondering if I had been too harsh or too emotional, but every time I replayed the years in my head, the pattern stayed the same. I was only valued when I was useful, and only loved when I did not need anything in return. What surprised me most was how light I felt once I stopped trying to earn their approval, because without that weight, I could finally see my life clearly and understand that independence had cost me a family, but dependence would have cost me myself. I realized that favoritism does not always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like neglect disguised as trust and strength used as an excuse. And the quiet child grows up believing they are difficult when they were simply invisible. I did not cut my family off dramatically, and I did not demand apologies because closure did not come from them. It came from accepting that they were never going to change, and that my peace depended on how much access I allowed. Today, I am still successful, still stable, and still strong, but now I am strong by choice, not because I was forced to be, and I no longer confuse endurance with love or silence with loyalty. I did not lose my family the day I said no. I lost the role they had written for me, and in walking away from that role, I finally learned what it meant to choose myself without guilt. I am an ancient scholar. I have read this story carefully, and the truth is simple, even if it is uncomfortable, because favoritism does not disappear just because it is unintentional, and neglect does not become love just because it is quiet when one child is taught to endure while another is protected. The family is not balanced, it is convenient. Strength is often praised only when it costs others nothing, and boundaries are called selfish only by those who benefited from the lack of them. This story was never about money or success. It was about a role that was assigned without consent and enforced through guilt. In every generation, the quiet child learns early that peace comes from silence, but silence is not loyalty, and endurance is not love. When someone finally says no, they are not betraying family. They are correcting a lifetime of imbalance. The verdict is clear. Setting boundaries is not cruelty, choosing yourself is not abandonment, and walking away from a role that harms you is not selfish, it is wisdom.